Now, when getting ready for a garden, there's a lot of steps that we have to do. I tell my husband, I said, as long as there's dirt and there's bugs, I'm not going to be out there. So Ken plants the garden, and I enjoy the fruits from that labor. In our backyard, when we moved into this house, there was a very nice area that was already used for gardening. And it had nice soil, and if anybody knows a lot about our area, the soil is not that great. There's a lot of rocks, there's a lot of clay, it's just not that perfect for planting a garden. But in this area, it has been cleared, it's been tilled, and in that soil has nutrients. And it is an amazing place to grow a garden. Now what I'd like to do today as I'm talking about this is pertain this to your life. How is the soil that you are putting your thoughts into? Because everything that we think, everything that we say, everything that we do, we are creating those seeds of desire, those seeds of doubt, those seeds of confusion, those seeds of anger, those seeds of hurt. But we're also creating those seeds of success, those seeds of love, those seeds of abundance. So in this story, I'd like you to kind of use this metaphor as your life, and the soil as your thoughts that you're putting the seeds into. As in the quote, it says, when we put the thoughts in, is it the soil that produces, or is it the seed that produces? Which one is the one that is the creator? And I say it's both. Because if I'm throwing seeds out onto pavement or onto soil that is not fertile, there's a chance that that seed is not going to grow. So making sure that I remember my thoughts. In the seeds also, if you look at seeds, on the back of seeds, they have instructions. Does it need a lot of sunlight? Does it need a lot of water? There's ideas and ways of creating to make sure that you have an abundant harvest. But if you put a seed in where it's supposed to require lots of sun, and you put it in a shady place, it's not going to grow as well. So in Ken's garden, he tills the garden, and he tills it a couple times a year. He'll put all the grass clippings in, and he also tills the old vegetables and the plants, and he tills those under. So he's continually taking care of the soil for the next harvest. In our lives, are we continually taking care of ourselves for that soil to be fertile to plant the seeds? And again, what seeds are we planting? Now, the ground doesn't care. The ground has no opinion on what seed you plant. The seed is the thing that's going to tell the ground, tell the creator, if you will, what is being produced. So we know that if we put in crookneck squash seeds, that's what we're going to get. We're not going to get an apple tree. We're not going to get an oak tree. We're going to get crookneck. Tomatoes are not going to be squash. They're going to be tomatoes. So the seeds that are planted is what is going to be produced. Now what's very interesting is if you have a seed in your hand and you continually hold on to it, it's never going to get planted. Now we've got a beautiful oak tree in our backyard that Ken planted when our son was born. So it's a 28-year-old oak tree, gorgeous, and it has little acorns on it. So I asked Ken, kind of late in the season, I said, can you collect me a lot of acorns so that I could hand them out? What is very fascinating, and again another metaphor, is that I had them in a cup, And I looked at them to bring them, and they mildewed. And they got sick, if you will, because they weren't planted. They were put in this cup, and nothing happened to them, and I had to throw them away. They weren't any good. How is that also in our lives when we have a thought or an idea, but we never act on it? And it kind of mildews and just goes by the wayside. Now there's another interesting thing about when you plant seeds in the ground, you start to water them, and we talk a lot about law of attraction, right? That you put out those thoughts and they come back, or we put those seeds of desire and they come back. Well, what happens to the seed in the ground? You have this little hard shell or seed, you put it in the ground, something happens inside of it that we forget about. It has to create immense amount of pressure inside of the seed for the seed to break open, or for the roots, if you will, to break through the seed to start to grow. So what happens when we put that seed of, I want peace in my life, and everything shows up unpeaceful, and there's all this pressure in our lives, and we're like, okay, I am not going there anymore. I am not going to ask for anything, because clearly I'm not doing it right, because everything opposite is showing up. Let me invite you to see that when there's an immense amount of pressure in your life, that those seeds are germinating and being ready to bust open. So look at it in a positive way instead of a negative. Because to truly master peace, you master peace in chaos. To truly master abundance, you master abundance when it looks like nothing is there that is abundant. To truly master our thoughts is when we have a monkey mind that's going haywire. In our thoughts, we may not be able to take care of the first thought that comes in our mind, but we have a choice for the second thought. And we can start that downward spiral, or we can start the upward spiral of what we want in our lives. We can tell that monkey mind to stop. I'm not going there. Remembering those seeds that we are planting. So the germination comes. It's time. It takes time for that to happen. And there's an amazing, if you go into Google germination, there's an amazing video that's time-lapsed. So you can see the roots. Now what Ken does is he plants his seeds, and then he waters, and he takes care of it. Guess what's the first thing that pops up? Weeds. Excuse me. How many weeds do we have in our own thoughts? We plant this seed of desire that we want more abundance and more love in our lives. And then we get up and we look at ourselves and oh, I look so yucky today. Life is so rotten. Why does this? What's popping up first is the weeds. The negative thinking that we have in our minds. And it grows faster than anything else. And so as Ken waters, he's not seeing anything pop up right away. It's not that you plant the seed, you put a little bit of water, and then all of a sudden it grows up. It doesn't work that way. It has to grow roots. And how is that not true in our own lives? That we have to grow those strong roots. And again, that pressure in our lives. And so then he waters with faith, knowing the seed's been planted, it's in the right soil, he's plucking the weeds, and he continues to water. And eventually here pops up some sprouts and the flowers. Now there's another thing that happens in a garden, and that's called insects and critters, right? Ken continues to plant peas, and we may get a few peas, but there is critters and insects that really like these, and they eat them, or they eat the roots, we're not sure, but they don't grow very well. How many insects and critters do we have in our own lives? How many people do we surround ourselves that are negative, that talk negative, that bring us down, that does not build us up in our lives? And if we're not careful, we believe what they're saying. You can't really do that. Who would want to hear your message? You laugh too loud. If you were just smart enough, can't you just be a little bit smarter than your sister? Or you're such a troublemaker. You're so negative. How many of those insects and critters do we have in our lives? There's also a thing called fertilizing. Sometimes we'll fertilize, or we'll add more nutrients. How many of those do we surround ourselves with? The people in our lives that build us up, that says, you are an absolute amazing person. You can do anything. I support you fully in all that you do. I love you. You're incredible. I had a friend, Roxanne, that she had 10 of her friends call her on her phone, and she put it on her voicemail, so she didn't answer them, and they just told her how incredible and wonderful and exciting they were to know her. And then when she had one of those days that wasn't going quite right, she'd listen to her voicemail. I'd invite you to do that. You know, just even 2 or 3 people, just say, you know what, would you just leave me a message and just tell me how wonderful I am? And then when that day is just not going right, listen to the voicemail. And release the critters and insects in your life. We don't need it. There's enough on television that's telling us what's going wrong. We certainly don't need friends and family, co-workers around us telling us what's wrong with us. So as that plants are growing and the harvest is coming, another thing that Ken does is he trims things back so that they grow, so that it doesn't overgrow. Now, how many times in our lives do we put those seeds of desire, but then we get so busy that we don't take care of ourselves? We can't give from an empty vessel. If we give from an empty vessel, all that can come back is empty. And we always have this thought that as long as I do for others, then I'll be okay. You can't give from an empty vessel. When on the plane it says, when the cabin pressure reduces, the oxygen masks come down. Who are you supposed to put the oxygen mask on first? Even if you have this innocent, defenseless little baby, you always put the oxygen mask on yourself first. When your cup is overflowing, it automatically gives to everybody else. There is no effort. It just is. So the first thing is to take care of ourselves, to trim our garden so that we have that focus that we're working with. And then when you have this abundant garden and it's overflowing, you give and give and give. Because there's always more than enough than we would ever eat. And so we have all this garden to give today. As you harvest, as you see the things manifest in your lives, comes the gratitude, that feeling of thankfulness. And it's automatic. It's not something that has to be. It's just automatic. And that's so with our lives. When we have that. So when we're thinking that positive thoughts, understanding that when there's pressure in our lives, that it's wonderful because those seeds are breaking up. And then when it comes to the end of the season, and understand about seasons, we look at the season, and right now it's beautiful, and the colors, and like you're saying, colors are changing. But then there comes the winter. Winter is a time of, again, caretaking. It's a time of rest and rejuvenation. It's not when we plant our garden. We don't plant our garden when the ground is hard, when the temperatures are wrong. And so that's the time when we're in that gratitude. And if we care for our garden and we may freeze it or can it, we continue to eat from the things that we already have. So after Ken completely harvests his garden, then the next thing he does is he tills everything down. He tills it all in, and then he gets ready for the next year. He's even kept seeds that he uses for the next year's garden. And again, in our lives, continuing with those right thoughts, continuing with those seeds of desire as they continue to grow in our lives. We are always, always, always planting seeds. It's your choice into what the seeds are that you're planting. It's your choice. The one thing too is if there's a plant that doesn't grow the way you want it to grow, then we pluck it out and we have new seeds. One year, Ken for a few years says, okay, I am not going to plant the garden. I don't want to do it anymore, you know, because he's the one watering it, taking care of everything. My mom was living with us at the time. And so, Mom and I decided, okay, we'll do it. And I got out there, and Ken tilled it for us. So, I mean, it was all nice and cleared, and we planted some strawberries, and we planted some squash, and that, and seriously, we went out there, planted everything, and I never went back again. And came the weeds, and came everything else, and Ken tilled it all under, because nothing grew. And how do we do that in our own lives? Is that we never tend. As practitioners, we learn that there's also the thought, but there's also the fire. And the fire is that feelings that we have and knowing that it is so. Again, the soil doesn't care what you plant. It doesn't care if you plant all weeds. The soil is not there judging that, oh, I know that she intended to plant strawberries, so we'll take these weeds and we'll just make them into strawberries, because we knew that that's what she intended. The soil doesn't work that way, and neither does creation. You're the one planting the seeds of desire. You choose which plants. I know within my own life, when I was going into interfaith ministry, for a year I kept saying, I want to be of love and service. I want to be of love and service. What are the mantras that you say in your life? And seriously, I went to a workshop And I asked a dear friend, because she was an interfaith minister, and the only religious I knew was LDS and Catholic. And I said, what is an interfaith minister? And she said that she was ordained by a shaman, by a Catholic priest, by a rabbi, by a monk. And I thought, how cool each month to learn about different religions. And this was before I found and even was introduced to the science of mind. And I went and within a week I was enrolled in New York as a distant learner to be an interfaith minister. And my husband and my family were asking, what are you doing? I said, I don't have a clue. Seriously, it was bang, 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 bang. And it was incredible, this path. And what I realized down the road was that seed that I had planted, that I continued to say, I want to be a beloved service. I was on the perfect path. But it wasn't even in my radar. It wasn't even in my area of scope. In fact, when I was going to school, I had a friend, and she said, so you're going to be a minister? It's like, no, I'm just going to school, and I'm just learning about the religions. There was no way. And on the second year, when we had to take vows and commitments, and we were getting ready, and what I realized was I had never asked my family what they thought. That I was on this road, and honestly, I did not know where it would take me. I said yes to being a beloved service. And I called Ken, and he said, well, you're there, aren't you? When I asked him, do you support me? Is this okay with you? And I called my children, and I called my mom. And it was very interesting because I was talking to my mentor and my dean at the school, and she said it had nothing to do with that. And I thought, what do you mean? And she said, you were calling them because you still weren't sure. And the thing was, which was perfect, was when Ken says, well, you're there, aren't you? Do you want to come home? He was like, no, I don't want to come home. And I had that moment of clarification. So there's mantras that you say in your life over and over and over again that you may not even be aware of, that shows up. And a lot of times it'll show up in ways that you had never imagined them to show up. But you get a choice. So I invite you to plant those seeds of desire, to know the seeds that you're planting, and not make them weeds. To realize the germination, the processing time. To water and take care of yourself. To release the negativity and the weeds. To give them lots and lots of sunshine and fresh air and perfect environment. And then to enjoy the harvest. Enjoy what you create in your lives. And create that gratitude that you have. Because it's your choice. So let's go ahead.